Hello, everyone. Today, here at the Center for Artificial Intelligence at the University of São Paulo, we have the great pleasure to have the lecture that will be done by our Professor Christoph Burchard. He is the director and also founded the Center of Artificial Intelligence that it's called the C4AI at the Frankfurt city. He is professor of law, and he has a lot of interesting researchers in the area. That it's an interdisciplinary research also, so he have a lot of research from other areas in the C4AI. And he also will talk a little bit about this. And today we will learn a lot about the critical computational literacy, that it's also a very interesting theme. So thank you again to come here in Brazil. And now we have the presence of the Professor Christoph Burchard here. So it's really a great pleasure for us. And so the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
thank you so much for the kind introduction and the kind invitation. It's really a great pleasure and honor to be here today. Okay. So take two. Okay, let's see whether I can do this. And you have to cut it later. So thank you so much for the kind introduction and kind invitation. I hope I can reproduce what I just said a little bit. So thank you so much for Professor Christina, Professor Fabio, all the directors and members of the Center for Artificial Intelligence here at USP. I would also like to thank everyone who is participating here in presence and in the camera. And I would also like to say a special thank you to all those who made it possible to get here. So my special thanks go to Joao Gianchini for taking care of me in the last days and weeks so carefully, and Eduardo Jat for First of all, this is still work in progress. So what I will not present to you is a final understanding of critical computational studies. I'm rather here also to learn from your experiences of what this idea of artificial intelligence literacy, AI literacy, or what we would call critical computational literacy truly entails. Second of all, what I will do is a report, if you will, from within the conceptualization phase, which is the phase I think that research is mostly still in, but what we of course see on the horizon is then to implement that. And I curse this, the necessary curse of implementation, because once you then start to bring that into true education and training, and of course then also bring in tests and exams and everything, all your grand ideas of how to conceptualize critical computational literacy might not be thrown overboard, but need to weather the storm of practice, if you will. But still, this is the conceptualization phase, and to have proper conceptualization in the first place, I think, is key to then later have a proper implementation. Finally, or thirdly, this is nothing that I have developed myself, so I would like to thank everyone who was involved from my team at the Center for Critical Computational Studies at Goethe University, the C4AI. Especially, I would like to thank the members in my board, Ulrich Meyer, Franziska Matthäus, and Juliane Engel, especially Juliane Engel, who comes from educational sciences and who has hence the experience of really putting many of the issues that we will talk about into, if you will, educational context. And finally, I have to warn you, since I am a lawyer, I will have a small law part in that talk. I hope it makes sense why, but again, we'll come to that in a second. Now,
use this one.
Okay. Another take then? No. Okay, good. Two pockets, two mics. Let's see. Yeah, these are the pros. Okay. So microphone problems, but nothing that we can't solve. So this is our mission statement that we at C3S put out with regard to CCL, and the aim is to establish and activate critical computational literacy as what we call a transformative framework where we empower students, citizens, and communities alike to thoughtfully relate and engage with, you will also technologies with, if you will, driven by computers in not only digital times, but in times where the digital has become so usual that we only register the digital once we miss it. So it's only the lack of the digital which makes the digital very present. Or to put it differently, if you don't have WhatsApp in Brazil, you're really not able to communicate. So I had to go WhatsApp for this trip. So this is, if you will, the post-WhatsApp times in Brazil. Without WhatsApp, it's difficult to communicate other than your face-to-face communication. If you want to read the full mission statement, you can scan the above QR code, and if you want to learn more about C3S, that's the lower QR code. Now, what I will do in my talk is I will first look into AI literacy, use that as a point of departure, and start here with the EU AI Act, the famous or infamous EU AI Act, which has now a provision which requires the many stakeholders and of the AI process to activate and be active within AI literacy. Then I will also briefly look into what educational studies have brought about on AI literacy, before then coming to the topic at hand, critical computational literacy, where we'll do a short overview over its foundations, and then what I call the ABC of CNC, that is to not only look into critical computational literacy, but break that down into critical computational competencies, so the C, critical computational attitudes, the A, and to cross-cut that, critical computational biographies. So ABC as an attitudes, biographies, and competencies as central elements of critical computational literacy. But now, first, AI literacy as the starting point of my talk. And again, I'm sorry, first, a short introduction into the law. And why? Because, as I already said, AI literacy is now being, if you will, legalized. It's been is now becoming a legal term under the EU AI Act. I will not go into the EU AI Act as such, otherwise we would need to spend, let's say, 6 months reading this heavy document together. If you want to read more, again, this is the QR code, but it's a big thing. Let's see whether the approach taken by the European Union to regulate artificial intelligence will hold water, that we will see in the next years. I know that many of you in Brazil study the EU AI Act closely, so I will just keep it at that. However, what I want to point out that in Article 4 of the EU AI Act, there is now a provision on AI literacy, which, to briefly address it, which requires providers and deployers of AI to take measures to ensure that their staff and other persons dealing with the operation of AI have a sufficient amount and a sufficient level of AI literacy at hand. This is further then defined in Article 356, and there's more, of the EU AI Act, where AI literacy is defined as meaning the skills, the knowledge, the understanding, which allow set providers, deployers, and interestingly enough, also affected persons, so possibly all of us, to taking into account their respective rights and obligations, to gain a sufficient amount of awareness about the opportunities, risks, and possible harm that AI can do. So it's very, very broad. And if that is not enough, then there is one of the hundreds of recitals is also taking into account or is further going into AI literacy, where again the idea that also affected persons by AI are to be imparted with AI literacy is mentioned, and where then a very general term is used, namely notions. What are the notions of AI literacy? And it's not really spelled out, but the regulation uses the term notion to capture a lot of things. We will have to look into what that actually means. And the aim to an extent is then to foster AI as in trustworthy AI in the European Union, and to also in the future work on AI literacy tools. So there is a new market using AI to impart knowledge on AI literacy tools which are to be developed. So you see, this is a big thing now. I could go into more articles which mention, however, briefly the concept and the idea of AI literacy, but the central point here is that AI literacy is now a legal concept under a European Union law, which of course takes up research that has already been done in other disciplines especially, but which will likely spill over into those other disciplines again, including, of course, from the technical sciences, the natural sciences, economics, law. So AI literacy is now truly a central term, which will have many implications. So this was very brief overview of why I think that AI literacy is a good starting point, especially from a European Union context. But why would you care in Brazil? And the main, I think, argument is that the the EU AI Act has in Article 2.1c a provision which basically internationalizes the scope of application of the EU AI Act. Because this application, as it is regulated here, applies also to providers and deployers of AI that have their place of establishments or that are located in third countries, yet where the output is having an effect in the European Union. So we see now this regulatory scheme that we already saw with the GDPR, the data protection scheme, the EU data protection scheme, to also take effect here, that although it is a European Union regulatory framework, it captures others countries as long as they are producing systems that have output or that take effect in the European Union market. So I'm not talking only, if you will, as a European here, I'm talking as a person who comes from Europe, but who is acutely aware that what we do at this moment in Europe has some global reach or wants to have global reach. And we then need to talk about whether this idea of AI literacy, which I will later then develop into critical computational literacy, how we can then account for different approaches to AI in different cultural and scientific and social contexts, because the European subspecies, the German approach to AI is certainly not something that is holding water and that is valid throughout this planet, if you will. So the first point is that the EU AI Act has this huge possible scope of application. The second thing that I think is important to notice that most of the research that has been done so far is on AI literacy in schools, especially in K-12 education. Now we have to, at least per the EU AI Act, look also to, I remind you, deployers and providers of AI systems and affected persons, and that is certainly not only schools. So the scope of application is getting far bigger. And there's two elements to that. First is, isn't that an advantage for big tech? Because, if you will, small tech, people or companies that try to now enter the market cannot impart the same or do not have the same resources to train their staff to a level of AI literacy that will be developed as per the EU AI Act at some stage. So there is an interesting combination that regulation is possibly supporting established market players. The second aspect is that also, as it is defined, and I leave you the definition, I spare you the definition, but also public authorities are now possible providers and especially deployers of AI. So universities now have to possibly start training people and imparting knowledge on AI literacy, and I see a lot of interesting implications and problems arising for us public authorities, because that is now again a new dimension of work that has to be done. So this will I think we need to look very much into that, whether this is something that universities or public authorities will be able to do, at least in Europe. I know that public authorities in your country, in Brazil, are very much working in that direction. In Germany, I don't know. We'll see. A second point that I would like to briefly make is what the regulatory effect of that Article 4 EU AI Act will be difficult, or is difficult to envisage. It is very easy to envisage that a new or an old AI certification industry now will pop up and will gain more strength. Because if that is the obligation of deployers and providers of AI to ensure levels of AI literacy, at some stage one has to certify that this is being done to a sufficient level. So we will see an interesting new industry popping up or getting stronger. And is that the aim of strengthening AI certification industry, or is it more, or shouldn't it be more of more importance to really look into the substance of imparting knowledge on AI literacy? So the regulatory effect of that provision is very much, I think, something that we need to discuss at some stage in the law context. I'm not yet completely convinced that this approach, which sounds fair at the first place, is or might not have actually a counterproductive effect. And the final point is that the substantive, you will notion of AI literacy within and beyond the EU AI Act is something, and I will look into this now, something very much open for discussion, let's put it that way. So this, again, is where the lawyer would ask, well, what do you mean by AI literacy? And then we would look into the definitions of the EU AI Act. We wouldn't probably be too happy with that because it's still rather vague. So this is where the second regulatory effect and the third point, substantive notions. Interesting to see that they use this very open and bizarre term of notion, which is like the most general one that I've ever found in a legal text. Like, you know, I don't know what it is, but there's notions to it. How really to relate that? We'll see. Now, AI literacy has been researched and is being researched to an ever greater degree, especially in educational sciences, especially in the school context. There's two texts that I quoted here or QR coded here, which are just review articles of the last couple of years. They review some 47 to 64 articles just dealing with AI literacy, and as it was mentioned in one of those texts, we see an explosion of AI literacy discussions in today's literature, with a highly diverse take on what actually AI literacy really entails. So the real, if you will, substance of AI literacy, the notions of AI literacy, although there is much written on it, still need a lot of concretization. This is the model that is developed by and reviewed by Pinsky et al. Can actually zoom in a little bit in that, and you see that it's pretty A, complicated, and B, diverse. So ranging from a, if you will, more social to a more technical curriculum. It goes from how humans and organizations in society play a role in AI context, to truly the computer science prerequisites of coding and writing the algorithms that drive the AI models. And to make things then a little bit even more interesting is we have then cross areas identified where ethical, critical literacy is to be coming in every of these elements. So it's, and bring that then into, please, into the EU AI context. There will be a lot of jurisprudence possibly, or nothing, because everyone is afraid of it. So this is the two dimensions then that we can envisage. Now, this is, if you will, and I will not go into this without just maybe one point. So, and this is also criticized in this text, if data, which is of course a crucial element of AI, so without data you cannot at least do AI as per machine learning, that we know. But if data for AI is and I agree, is an integral part of AI literacy. Data literacy, critical data literacy is an integral part. Is visualization of data really an integral part of AI literacy? I don't know. So you see that there is different elements which probably we would need to balance whether it's something that everyone has to be literate about, and whether this is really possible to have one holistic model where all skills, knowledges, understandings, competencies, attitudes can be brought into one model is something which is, again, to be discussed. I have slight doubts about this. And this is where I will come to the idea of critical computational literacy, and then there's a there and back again story to that. So not a Hobbit's tale, but a Christoph's tale, if you will. Of course, all that I will talk about now, the idea of critical computational literacy, we can and should at some stage feed back into the discussion of AI literacy as per the EU AI Act or beyond. There's a couple of questions related to that. So why look into the computational? First of all, I would argue that many of the notions, I learned that from the EU AI Act, of AI, are intrinsically intertwined with at least three dimensions of the computational, which is also more technical than the digital. The first one is algorithms, the second one is data, and the third one is, if you will, HPC or high performance computing. So these are the three elements that I would identify as something that, if you want critical computational literacy also to foster stronger AI literacy, you need to be aware of. So a certain amount of literacy as regards algorithms, as regards data, and as regards HPC and access to HPC, for example. The second point is, why would we, if you will, highlight the critical as an individual element in critical computational literacy? And my answer to that would be, well, maybe we don't necessarily need to, because also in the AI literature, in the AI literacy literature, there is empirical evidence that more and more people now start to bring in ethical, social, political considerations into this notion of AI literacy. But is it there naturally? I don't know. I always have problems with nature as something that has to be there, but the strengthening of the critical part, also in that very concept, is to designate that if you really want to talk about AI literacy or computational literacy, not only as a, if you will, technical tool, but something that is shaping also our, if you will, communities, then we should also try to highlight that in the very, if you will, basic and foundational terms. So the idea of bringing in the critical as a second term is there to highlight that there is a, if you will, interdependence between the computational and the critical, to highlight or to sustain that this is nothing that is only being researched and has no real world effects, but that it is something that is closely related to the social, the ethical, but also the computational, the use of data, the use of algorithms. And the third question is then, how are these two C's, and I don't care whether the critical or the computational is there in the first place, how these two C's are related. And if you will, there is two possibilities to relate them. And if you do not know these notations, that is very clear because I kind of invented them. And I don't really have a term for them yet. So if you have good terms for them, it's good. So the first, I think that's the traditional way of relate those two C's, is this double arrows, where coming from one C, one then looks out to the other C. So as a lawyer, I would say, oh, there is artificial intelligence in the back, so I will look to that. or maybe the other way around, the guys from the technical departments might at some stage look to the lawyers and say, well, yeah, fair enough, I don't want to deal with it. Now that sounds maybe a little funny, but the if you will, what is meant by that is that this disciplinary take of the double error, it's not me, this disciplinary take has the danger or entails the risk that at some stage one discipline tries and will try to dominate the other, or at least there is that sensation that we as lawyers, for example, have, that if we don't have really much of a clue of what the AI guys are doing or the computational guys, that we are in the defense. And that is not a good starting point to start the discussion. And this is why we try to relate those two C's by means of a intertwining notion intertwining notation, where the one C and the other C are really brought together in a way that they complement each other, but also that they bring about new knowledge. And that's so the idea of critical computational literacy is not to follow this traditional path of a double arrow, but more of an intertwining of those two C's, of the computational and the critical. Now, what does that mean? So I'm not looking into concrete skills that we need to impart, programming skills, or I don't know, Frankfurt School of Critical Thinking as a necessary skill that will now dominate the world. No. What I really rather would like to highlight are three, if you will, backgrounds of these reflections, and also three complications. And why I'm trying to, if you will, look to the foundations, is that we are living in such an innovative and open and highly dynamic times that now to designate, well, critical computational or AI literacy needs basic competences in, I started with basic, so probably no one does basic anymore, but in C++ or in Python, might be working now, but in a couple of years, we might see grand shifts in that. So we rather should have now a good look into the foundations to then be able to adapt to innovation and dynamics in the field. The first point that I would like to underline, that's the lawyer talking, is that critical computational literacy also needs, very important, it's an also, look to the political and especially the democratic importance in imparting that knowledge, imparting that skill, imparting that competencies, that attitudes, that critical computational literacy to our citizens. Because in a world which is ever and ever more run by AI, or which also is manipulated by AI, or only think about the whole deep fake discussions, it is crucial to empower our citizens to shape that technology, and with the rise of big tech, also to empower them to see where they are no longer able to shape certain paths. And this is, I think, and I could go, of course, into more depth there, but I'll spare you that. I think for a democratic society, in an age of AI, or in an age where the computational takes over a lot of crucial decision-making, or which at least prepares a lot of the decision-making in our society, it's crucial that the political/democratic implications of these technologies are brought to the fore. The second point, CCL, is also, I would suggest, should be built on, if you will, a relational approach to the computational. Relational means that it's not only a tool, which we can use, but it's also a tool which shapes us. So this is a science and technology studies approach, STS approach, where the human and the computational are shaping each other music. My favorite example, a little silly, but I think maybe it holds some water, are toasters. I always like toasters as an example. So how do have toasters, you know, the things where you put bread in, how do they shape our world? Well, before toasters, eating this very funny, is it bread? I don't know, thing that you put in there wasn't really popular. It was only with the rise of with toasters that was really entrenched as something that you could eat. Now, being a German, we have this famous tradition of bread baking, and hence that's not bread. So toasters might actually have had an impact on what people think bread is. Sounds silly, but the main part is I think we need to account that these technologies are shaping how we perceive the world to an extent. And if we that have in mind, I'm fine. So this is the relational approach where the computational and the technological or the human part are not, if you will, separate entities, and where the human is not only, if you will, the master which uses the tool, but where there is, if you will, a relational approach to these two topics. The third, this is where the educational sciences are now coming in strong, is that when we approach CCL, we need to make explicit that there is an explicit and implicit way of imparting knowledge. The one is what we do in such settings as here. So there is knowledge, there is skills, openly, explicitly taught, if you will, imparted. But there's also an implicit notion to CCL, where there's possibly also hidden curriculum in how we teach. And this is then bringing me back to these double errors, for example. If we teach CCL in a double error approach, there is the danger, at least, that we perpetuate disciplines. There's the danger that one discipline tries to dominate the other. And there's also then the danger that we do not address the inequalities in our societies and how they are perpetuated by these technologies, because these technologies have a access problem, if you will. We just published together, for example, with Christina, a paper where we argue that our favorite LL.Ms, so not masters of law, but large language models, can be a global inequality crisis. Because why? Because only certain portions of the population will use these LL.Ms, have access to these LL.Ms, especially once they are based on a paying model, and once the proper prompt engineering is a matter of social stratification as well. So all of these issues must be addressed so that we do only do the classical university teacher, I love to stand in front of people and teach explicitly. We also need to address the implicit and what we teach by, or what we transmit by the way we teach. Fourth point is we need to differentiate more than our current approaches. And for example, the EU AI Act really seems to have in mind. We need to differentiate between user groups. So teaching in front of high school students might be something different. I don't know whether better or worse than doing university training or training for professionals. And we need to account for cultural heterogeneity. So that's a tough word. So cultural differences, especially also with regard of how one approaches AI. So in Asia, there might be a completely different way to approach human-like AI than in notorious Germany, which at least in some portions of the society, old technology is still viewed as something bizarre. Again, I installed WhatsApp only when coming to Brazil. But I'm using a different program, but no worries. As I said in the beginning or before, we need to account for those rapid technological innovations and developments because otherwise we would always be behind in our teaching and our curriculum efforts behind where science is or where companies are. And the sixth point is something that at least I could report from within Germany or Europe, and where would be very much welcoming comments from your experiences, that the experience of teaching and training all these kinds of literacies that came before, media literacy, digital literacy, well, they're bleak to extent, especially because, at least in the school settings, we had this maybe also very politics approach that we just need a new discipline or a new subject in school, where once a week or once a month we teach people to use social media, and then we have media literacy, and there is now efforts to do the same. Now we do like a new subject, digital literacy in German schools, but my experience is that doesn't really hold much water. And the same holds actually true in professional training, where professionals are trained like executives of also big companies. So at some stage they have to do an ethics course. They go in, they get the certificate, they go out, and I don't know what they would do, play golf, or I don't know, buy the world. So again, or vice versa, the lawyer has to do the AI course, and then I start talking about AI, and the AI guys think, oh God. So here again. So the experiences of this classical training, this classical literacy approaches are rather bleak. So the whole project that we need to address now is to learn from that bleak experience and hopefully do it better. How to do it better? Well, one suggestion, one hope is this ABC. I was rather castigated for using an ABC, so very basic literacy, preschool terminology, but I just like rhymes. So ABC of C and C I very much liked. So I pitch it here, and let's see if that carries today, or if not, then I'll just have to throw it out of the window again. But what do I mean with that? The first is to look into competencies, which are not skills, but it's still an explicit notion. So it's something that we want to have people explicitly taught. But much of the research that is done is basically, or that's what they write about, is competencies, but I have rather the idea that it's knowledge and skills that are addressed here. What I have, or what we have more in mind, is trying to impart explicitly so competencies as in advanced competencies, something that goes beyond being able to write code or to critically think. Very tentatively, something that is imparting a proficiency to come to terms with, to shape, but also to if you will, unshape the computational realities and futures in a justifiable, equitable, sustainable, and productive manner. And that entails general advanced competencies like the recognition and evaluation of the computational recognition is, I think, something that we really need to impart in terms of where is artificial intelligence, where is something actually taking place, where are computational technologies, being brought into the play. I mean, this is what you were also talking about, that one needs observatories to really highlight where these technologies are being used. And this is also what I meant with the post-digital beforehand. We are so accustomed now to certain technologies, the use of data, the use of algorithms, that we really don't recognize them anymore. It's normal. It has become second nature, to use a Frankfurt term. So this competence to recognize the use of certain technologies is primordial, I would say. Evaluate, of course, we need. I don't spend a lot of word on that. That would be very good if people were able to then, once they recognize, to also evaluate that critically. Metacognition relates to the idea that one has to think about how one thinks. But that might be a very advanced competency, because but at least trying to impart that idea that one is in a certain, set on a certain path, is also crucial in our times today. Withdrawal, I don't yet know, but that is, of course, the big question of our day. To what extent do we need to teach our citizens, our students, that they can they, question mark, withdraw from certain uses of AI, of computational technologies? That is also a big question. Again, I wasn't able to withdraw in terms of using WhatsApp. I mean, I would have been able, but then I probably would still be somewhere in, I don't know, in Manaus. And I would have loved to people find me, but no, but I would have, I don't know. So withdrawal is a double-edged problem. Design-oriented competencies then, like coding, etc., is no longer, this one man or one woman, one person show. So to impart collaboration, interdisciplinarity is crucial, but also, if you will, general problem-solving capabilities, where we not ask you're proficient only in Python, so when the next programming language comes in, you're out, so that the proficiency to adapt and to transfer knowledge to new use cases. Critical computational attitude is the implicit notion of CCL. It refers, if you will, to a mindset upon which you do not reflect. It's the, if you will, the values that you have internalized, that you have subjectivized, that you, if you will, act on independently from your active thought, your conscious thought. It is controversial whether AI literacy has that notion of attitude ingrained in that. So there is positions which try to highlight that, although I'm not quite sure whether the attitude, for example, mentioned by Wang et al., where they include into AI literacy emotional attitudes and values of students to AI, whether that is actually what we have in mind. Others, like Pinsky, they would say, no, AI literacy is only that explicit notion of having certain skills, certain, how do they frame it? Enabling holistic proficiencies. So this is the explicit one. So whether we one really should look into this implicit notion of attitude is, at least when we look to AI literacy research, still very much open. I think what we should do is make good use of the implicit. Make good use means if there is a hidden curriculum, at least something that imparts implicit orientations, value orientations, logics of practice. We can use that to empower our citizens, maybe even far better than only by training, by imparting skills and competencies. So the implicit is something very strong, and we should, although there might be some almost an enlightenment vision inherent to that, whether that's still usable, I don't know, but we should bring people, we should impart certain values which are of extreme importance, also would argue today. And of course, this is where the educational sciences, and that's not me, would love to do more research on, is what are these, to do research on that. So what is the implicit notion, I love that word, the implicit notion of CCL, the hidden curriculum, and that is something that is not only there to actively impart and receive, but also something that is now seen as a research area as its own. And the final point is biographies, critical computational biographies, where I do not have in mind the very old-fashioned idea that we need to do lifelong training, but the idea here is that we, first of all, need to broaden the scope. As I said before, today's AI literacy frameworks is mostly targeted on students, a little bit also on the workforce, but the general public is not really covered. So we actually can think bigger, and we can do research on these critical computational biographies, focusing on how, like from the very beginning of your life to the end, one gets immersed, if you will, into these technologies. This is something that we need to look into, both as the one who imparts notions of CCL and others, but also as researchers who look into critical computational literacy from a research perspective as a matter of research area. Having said this, I again have our mission statement at hand. So the idea, to come back to that beginning of mine, is, and maybe that's more clear now what we have in mind, to use critical computational literacy as this transformative framework, empowering community citizens, students to relate and engage with algorithmic data-driven technologies, the computationally, in these post-digital times, and to do so, or so we would argue, we, of course, at some stage in the implementation phase, in the curriculum phase, we need to look into concrete skills, concrete, if you will, courses. But to build these courses, we need to have these foundations in mind. Also, again, to be able to account for the innovations and dynamics of science and practice of computational technologies. And to do so, we suggest to look into this bigger framework of CCL, or the ABC of CNC, CNC with the intertwining arrow, not the double arrow, and this might also be something, to get really back to the legal basics, that we then need to bring back into a reading of AI literacy in the EU AI Act, because to strengthen democratic societies, to be able to account for the potentials and the risks of AI in a globalized, mostly globalized economy, we need to differentiate on the one hand, and on the other hand, account for competencies, more general advanced competencies. We need to account for inner attitudes, and we need to do so in a far, if you will, broader manner, but not only looking on target groups like the workforce or students, but to broader notions of critical computational biographies. Thank you so much.
And looking forward to the discussion.
Okay. Thanks so much, Professor Burchard. It was a very enlightening lecture, and it opened our perspectives about AI literacy, I'm sure. I will follow your research because you said that you are doing research in this team, and this is the start point. So I really want to to follow it. Now we are in the question time, but before open to questions, I would like to make my question also. But I saw that the director of the C4AI is raising the hand, so I will give the paper.
Actually, I have many questions, so
Okay.
I'll just have one question. So because I think this is really, really a very nice theme and topic, and if there's any reason to have a multidisciplinary centers to have talks such as this, so very nice. Thanks a lot. But one question I have is this: so you have all these the AI Act, which I try to read, but it's really very hard for me. And
Not only for you.
Brazilian Act is very, very much inspired.
I know.
Maybe it's copied, but it's not copied.
No,
inspired. It's inspired. So, but it's
critically
inspired. So, but it's a lot lighter. It's shorter.
Yeah.
So I could read it. I don't remember reading about AI literacy. So maybe it's not really something that will happen in Brazil. But I guess my question is this: how do you see in Europe the AI literacy being enforced? So who will actually sue? Google? Okay, you're not teaching people, or no, it's not the case. I mean, what happens when it starts? I mean, is it clear?
Yeah. I was looking into that as well, and interestingly enough, but I'm not in. So I had difficulties reading the whole EU AI Act as well. So I took a couple of days to try to digest it. As far as I know, but I hope we don't need to delete this answer in the future in the YouTube. There is no specific provision on the enforcement of Article 4. So it falls under the general provision, and then it's for the member states to find the proper solutions. If that is correct, it shows that AI literacy might not be on the first political agenda. Also, you could make the argument if there's no harsh enforcement regime in place, then the importance might be lesser than other portions of the Act, EU AI Act. My impression is, however, that companies are looking into this also to stay compliant, and that they do have a certain interest in the topic as well, because they registered that this is also becoming a publicity element. So to foster trustworthy AI, you should be to an extent AI literate. So maybe we can bet a little bit on the market that companies will have a motivation to do so. Public authorities, by the very definition of public authorities, should of course be compliant. Let's see whether that idealistic argument is holding water in the long run. So but to make it clear, I just use the EU AI Act as a starting point. I think it has an important message that we need to think about this AI literacy as a topic which not only applies to deployers and providers of artificial intelligence, but also to the affected persons. So there should be a political momentum, and we should probably push for that to really push in the direction that we need more we need more. We need more notions of AI literacy in our schools, in our university education, in our lifelong training programs, etc., etc. Because if we really think that AI will have a significant impact on the way we run our countries, then, or our judiciaries, etc., then we also need to account for a certain amount of literacy.
Thank you very much. Now I will start with the question, then I will open it. I agree that AI literacy is very important, and mainly in the public sector, I think so. For example, in this moment, as I said, we have, for example, in the Court of Appeal of the State of São Paulo, more than 8,000 lawsuits connected with artificial intelligence systems. But what it's my main concern when I read the decisions is they understand what's artificial intelligence. I give classes to many judges and the prosecutors here in Brazil, in the state of São Paulo, the most part of them. And when I'm teaching and talking about artificial intelligence, someone raised his hand and asked me, please, what's artificial intelligence? It's a robot inside the computer? I have this kind of, and it was not only one time that I have this kind of question, but it's this judge that will decide a case related to artificial intelligence. And it's why I think that the AI literacy is very important. And when we are talking about judicial power, I'm convinced that it's really important. But when I was listening to your lecture, I was thinking about the AI literacy and how the culture impacts this, and the way that we will teach about all the notions of artificial intelligence. And then I thought, the European legislator considered ethics as something that it's universal, and it's why they are talking about this AI ethics. So everybody in the world will have the same notion of artificial intelligence, and it's how we will achieve this objective. Or no, they are considering, for example, that there is a consensus and a notion of artificial intelligence inside the European Union, but maybe in other countries not. And if they want to sell some AI systems in Europe, they will need to adapt to it. And then we talk about the Brussels effect and so on. So this is my question. Thank you.
So maybe rating first. So your judges not knowing where the small robot is in the computer, that is dangerous. But maybe it's even as dangerous if that judge then uses AI support systems to render its decisions. So this is where things are getting really messy. So maybe using AI support systems to make decisions on AI by someone who really is not so much well versed in the details. So this is where things get really interesting.
And we are doing this also.
Yeah, that's why I said that. So that's the first. And as to your question, that's why I slipped into my presentation the idea that we need to account for, if you will, cultural, again, the difficult word, heterogeneity. Also in the approaches to AI and to certain technologies. And once we have that in the CCL system, my hope would then be to slip that back into there and back again into the notion of AI literacy. So to not do a neo-colonial Brussels effect where some supposed European critical approach to AI then has a universal or global effect or play. So but this is something that will at some stage maybe go to court. Is the AI literacy that Brazilian companies that produce AI to then deploy it in the EU, is that AI training that they impart sufficient under the EU AI Act? And this is, I think, where a sensitive approach is required, that a European approach is not the one and only. And I don't know whether that is the European approach in the first place, but let's just suppose that. So again, this is why cultural, social, political heterogeneity is, I think, one element in the consideration of how you devise this idea of critical computational or AI literacy.
Oh, thanks so much. So I will open to questions. I think that you raised the first. If you can present yourself, a short brief, and then make your question. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Renata Wasserman from the Computer Science Institute, Computer Science Department. Thank you for your talk. And I had a question that was related to the two previous ones. As I totally agree, we need AI literacy, but don't we actually need literacy in general? Because in the same way that you don't want a judge to establish rules about AI without knowing AI, a judge shouldn't establish traffic rules without knowing cars and how the traffic works. And we need people to have the ability to think critically. So if we are talking about democracy, we need people to think critically before they vote.
Yeah.
And what shall we do? Are we going to prevent people from voting, for example, if they're not literate enough?
I mean, the defensive answer here is that in the accounting of political considerations and democratic considerations in the conceptualization of CCL and also in the idea of a competency of metacognition, of maybe also being aware of the fact that you, as someone who knows your way around AI, are in a privileged situation. In contrast to a lot of people who do not have access to very primordial features of or notions of education. And of course, this is something where there's a pyramid, if you will. CCL is up here. If you can't read, being literate in the very first place, then it's really difficult to be literate in AI. But well, I can't address that, or I can't solve all problems. So let me start a little bit more up on the pyramid. But I think at least in terms of being aware, metacognition of where you start from, and to be able to also critically reflect on the political dimensions of the use of that technology and the imparting of the explicit and implicit competencies, attitudes, might be one way to a more equitable society. But again, maybe then we should do another seminar on, I don't know, global justice, planetary justice.
Thanks so much. On account of our time, we will have place two questions. But if someone wants to make also questions, you can also send it to us, and then we will share with Professor Burchard. You raised your hand, and you raised so first.
Thank you for your talk. I'm Ana Rosa Brandão from engineering department, computer engineering department. I totally agree about AI literacy. I'm giving a lot of talks for different public, and they are hungry about that because, okay. But talking about public policies, here in Brazil, we have laws that, not laws, but resolutions related to K-12 education, where all the schools must include computational thinking in their curriculum. And I understood that critical computational literacy, it's a kind of computational thinking, but with a kind of AI bias. Is that so or not? Because in which way critical computational literacy is related to computational thinking?
And that's a very good question. And now that the lawyer has to say the typical lawyer answer, it depends. See, always works. And it depends, of course, on your definition of computational thinking. If you define computational thinking, especially in terms of teaching people to think in this, if you will, engineering way of, problem solving step by step, maybe not taking into account so much political and social impacts, because from many curricula in critical computational thinking that I saw, that is not a big issue, but it might be different in Brazil. Then there would be a hidden agenda or a hidden curriculum that would be a little bit in tension with the idea of critical computational literacy. If computational thinking entails all that which I said and contains all the elements of critical computational literacy, then of course it's very, very similar. But maybe one divergence would be that I'm not so sure that we can do this. Let's do one class per week per student on computational thinking. I'm not sure whether that really, we have bad experiences with that in Germany, at least, because that's, on the one hand, it's this explicit notion of teaching. Now we teach you computational thinking, and now it's sports. And let's go to Portuguese. So this idea of teaching might have some impact in schools, but if you do that in the workforce, I don't know. But again, bleak experiences on our side of the ocean. So steps that we are now thinking about, also in terms of schools or work, teaching the workforce, is more an integrative approach, where we would do critical computational literacy in, well, sports is difficult, but in math, in German, in geography, and do it as a cross-cutting thing. So that would be, but that is, of course, revolutionizes curricula, and revolutionizing stuff, at least in Germany, is difficult. But that would be one important, I think, means to try to break up with these bleak experiences of doing, critical thinking, new subject matter in school, or critical computational thinking. Once a year, the workforce gets a training in computational thinking. Yeah, so we need to also then think about how to truly implement that stuff. So that are left out. We are working on that also with big players. I hope next time, if there's a next time that I may come, I can present more.
Okay.
Thank you for the lecture. I'm Valdemar Setzer from the same department of computer science as Renata. I have two comments and a question. First comment is about the robot and the computer, Christina's problem. This comes from the fact that the name is absolutely wrong, right? Science doesn't know what intelligence is, so there's no sense in qualifying intelligence as artificial or whatever. My denomination would be digital simulation of cognitive processes. This would be much more faithful to what is being done in the area. But unfortunately, the initials don't make a nice word.
Yeah.
Anyhow, about the computer or computational literacy, I hope it's not going to be made on primary school, on elementary school, on the first degrees of high school. Because if it's done at that age, on early age, for children and young adolescents, it's going to, how should I say, degenerate their way of thinking. Because at that age, they should not be thinking formally, in terms of algorithms. So if we teach algorithms for them or computer language, we are disturbing their development. Okay. Now my question is the following: do you think it would be possible? Well, I think that there are two big dangers in artificial intelligence. The first one is hallucinations, wrong information, right? And people believing on that. Second point is that I ask you, would it be possible to enforce a law that would forbid people to use results from artificial intelligence without going through a human judging about the results? Because that's a big danger. Computers don't make decisions. They make logical choices. Only humans make the decisions. So decisions taken by artificial intelligence should be submitted to humans so that they can be critical about it. But this would require laws. You understand?
So thank you so much for these comments and questions. You know better than I that AI was a term that was specifically come up with as a marketing tool. That was the idea, because they hoped that they would get funding for AI research. I mean, this was how it was created. I think there's even a list of different names that they had in mind, and they found AI, artificial intelligence, the best, and they were right. I mean, it's hell that brings up a lot of money. I agree. AI is certainly a tricky term, and there is a lot of other suggestions out there. At the moment, my impression is that's mostly machine learning that is being done, but there's also, of course, good old-fashioned AI. So whatever there is, I agree. About the young adults, or not adults, when to start making people think about these technologies. Again, the answer would be it depends. If you would start in kindergarten to train youngsters to think like in a programming manner, then we would disrupt creativity and possibly and the such. But that is exactly where the definition comes in. Is that critical computational thinking? Is that only in inverted commas the step-by-step problem-solving approach, or I would suggest that we need in critical computational literacy more, so that we would actually also make that hidden curriculum explicit. That doing so, what you were cautioning against is something that has the possibility to disrupt at least the way we brought up our kids before. So I wouldn't subscribe to such a course on computational thinking in kindergartens or preschools. But maybe one should start early to make kids aware that there is different approaches to life and to WhatsApp or not WhatsApp. So, well, there is no decision. WhatsApp is cool. About your questions, hallucinations certainly are an interesting subject matter. I agree. But the question, of course, will be in what respect are these hallucinations? It depends, I think, on the degree of your critical computational or AI literacy, how to work with these hallucinations, to recognize them in the first place. I think this is something like a skill or a competency that we need to impart, recognizing them. And then also to see whether in that hallucination there is more than just some, sorry to say that, bullshit. So maybe there is something more in there in that data that we were not able to process in the first place. So that would be also an interesting question for the computer science department, whether in hallucinations there might actually be something interesting. If we relate that to the term hallucination in as we use that in human terms, in hallucinations, many indigenous tribes, but also artists, etc., found creativity. They found something new. So just to caution against saying that hallucinations are outward bullshit. So we should also think about if they have something to it. But if they do not, then, and that relates to the second question, we humans need the capacity, the proficiency, the competence to detect, to recognize, and to then discard output, which we should not use because it's hallucinating, especially by LL.Ms. About the question, the big question here is the human in the loop. What's the role of the human in the loop? And I think it's not easy to give like one answer that always the human should also be in the loop. Again, I'm sorry, the lawyer says it depends, I presume, because I mean, look to how we train pilots. I mean, that's the traditional example, of course, but pilots are trained to trust their instruments and to not really believe in their own intuitions. And why? Because the instruments are in 99% or something like very high degree more precise than faulty human instruments. Of course, that leads to the problem that if the instruments malfunction, then the plane goes down. And you know that. I mean, there is the Brazilian Air France, which is a prime example of where pilots were not prepared to distrust the instruments, and hence something really bad happened. But from a utilitarian perspective, at least that's what we're being told. It's better to trust in the instruments because there would be more accidents in humans trusting their intuitions and not their instruments. And this, I think, is something that we need to also look into in other affairs. When we come to the judiciary, I, as a classically trained lawyer, would of course always say, yes, the human has to be the last decision maker. The human has to be the one who's doing the decision, because, as you said, machines cannot make decisions. They can give you output, something where they process input into output, especially, of course, on past data, which then is used to produce some logical inference prediction or whatever. Question then, the big also cultural question will be in the future is which system is better equipped to render whatever that is, good decisions, more equitable, fair decisions. And is it judges who might be biased, or is it machines that are also biased because of their training data? And now we are in a huge political discussion. Should we rather trust humans or should we rather trust machines? And this is, I think, where I just leave it, because I cannot give you a definite answer on that. I'm in the pro-human camp. I'm definitely in the pro-human camp, but I wouldn't be so without differentiations and looking into the use case at hand.
Thank you so much, Professor Burchard. Unfortunately, I will need to finish our event today. But for further questions, please send to us, and I will be glad to send it to Professor Christoph. And yes, for sure, we will invite you more times because we need to learn more about the subject. Thank you so much to kindly accept our invitation, be here. It was a great pleasure. So have a nice day, and thank you for everyone that it's here or it's watching us in the YouTube.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It was